Welcome to another episode of Breaking into Cybersecurity. Today, we have Erik Rasmussen, founder of Erik Charles Consulting. We're here to talk about the cyber talent pool, leadership, and what we can do to develop the next generation. Erik, do you want to give us a little intro about your background and your organization?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Erik Rasmussen. I founded my company, Erik Charles Consulting, just over 2.5 years ago. And before that, was working with a large HR services company where I led a national strategy and partnership with Cisco Systems. A lot of that being IT consulting, managed project services, and staff augmentation. Erik Charles Consulting is a recruiting firm. I help tech startups with some of their foundational hiring strategy and contract hiring strategy. I'm also a coach as it pertains to career transition and have launched an executive coaching program and an academy for professionals that are looking for what's next. And that's what I do full time.
I love hearing someone say coach as part of their services. Tell me, how do you go about coaching founders in their hiring strategy in such a noisy AI market today?
Yeah, I love hearing that back too, because I think a lot of what I try to bring as a talent partner is not necessarily the order taking components of running searches. I feel like the value of bringing in a partner is to objectively just try to fine tune every element of the why behind who you hire, who you need to hire in the first place, and in the context of the business problems that need to be solved and how that translates into the actual requirements and how we vet people in more of a curated fashion. I really just grew fond of components of what executive search consists of and wanted to take elements of that into really every search that I conduct. You say coach, I say consultative in the context of being a recruiting partner. Really, I try to meet people where they're at. Usually at some point in time, if I'm working with a founder or an executive who's thinking about their hiring, they've had success in some capacity that brought them to that point in their career, really no matter the domain that we're talking about. I think it really starts with understanding that, understanding the details behind what's worked for them, what they've learned to adhere and not try to replace processes that may have worked, but augment them accordingly. That's just by nature of doing this and being what I call the people business for so long. And it starts on the basis of trying to build trust and build rapport with them. It's really as simple as that from my end.
And how do you help them with really defining requirements versus just taking something, a job description that they copied or got created by ChatGPT and throwing it out there and going, hey, let's be a little more conscious about this and really define what we need from the individual to fill the gaps in our team?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. First and foremost, I don't try to diminish if there is an existing job description that has been used, or there's a library of scope of work and project details that's been used time and time again for hiring. I don't try to necessarily throw that out of the picture. I actually welcome that into the conversation, but I just try to set clear expectations of the why behind the conversation, of what brings us to this point in time, the need to hire, starting with an overall understanding of the scope of where the company's heading and some of the objectives, what's preventing us from achieving that, and then translating that slowly but surely into why we need to bring someone in and making sure that we're aligned on the investment itself. So I think in the noisy market that you're alluding to, we have to be a little bit more refined in the details, I would say, of all different factors that go into making the right hire and being respectful of everyone's time, including mine and including theirs. We'll use the job description from time to time as a guideline to the conversation, but it's not the only way that we could really fine tune the intention behind hiring someone and the problems that they're going to solve through, I call it a bit more of a comprehensive assessment and a conversation that's twofold and collaborative by nature.
And I guess we could talk about recruiting on both sides of the coin. One is finding the candidates. Two is screening candidates according to the requirements, doing so in ethical, conscious way. First, how do you even reach the target candidates that you're looking for when many of them may already be employed?
So, Christophe, I think that the connection's a little bit off. If you
Okay.
can hear, okay. I think you were asking, how do we find the candidates? How do we target the right candidates, if I heard correctly?
So, in such a noisy market,
Hmm.
how do you go about finding qualified candidates when some of them may not be expressing that they're actively looking or on the job market?
Yeah. I think first off, acknowledging that it is a noisy market. And so what does that mean in the details around how we're going to go target people? We need to be really focused on establishing some sort of a rubric of an understanding of, typically it starts with must-have skill sets and experiences, technology stack, best practices as it aligns to the company, are always important and fundamental in the intake call. But we want to make sure that selective criteria is also reflective of what the market is telling us, the competitive landscape included. Oftentimes, I'll try to understand and do a bit of a benchmarking of competitor analysis on the company. And this is typical in executive search too, where we want to get to know the market in itself, use whatever intelligence we have to our disposal so that we're being more effective and more curated in who we're reaching out to and spending the time to do that. Obviously, there's tools like LinkedIn Recruiter. I still think that they remain king in the context of actually using LinkedIn as it was meant to be used for recruiters and sourcing the right candidates effectively. I know it will be a part of this conversation today. I think really helps optimize and amplify where people might be a little bit limited in their time of effective sourcing strategy and gathering the notes and translating that into a Boolean search more efficiently, more effectively, and using even some of the AI components of a tool like LinkedIn Recruiter, I've found to be very helpful. But I think a lot of the sourcing really starts and ends with me and hiring leader or founder of company seeing eye to eye and exactly the profile and the idea of what that person's going to look like, the company that they're going to come from, the industry specifically, the successful track record that they may have had. And if we do that effectively and in a detailed fashion, the majority of people that are going to respond passively or not should at least enable a conversation where the vetting could be a more effective conversation off the get go. I'd say it is just more important now than I've seen in my career.
So, you're using a tool like LinkedIn Recruiter, and some folks may or may not have their profile up to date, but then you also have the other side of the coin where individuals might be amplifying their experience. How do you go about really narrowing down the talent pool to not just the technical requirements, but the cultural requirements?
Yeah, and this might be a bit subjective. I don't think there's ever a one size fits all solution here, right? These are human to human connections after all. There's always going to be intangible components that go into this business. So, as we speak to culture, right, I think there's always a way to navigate in your search if there's companies previously that embody the culture that you're looking for as a hiring leader, right? That gives us a step towards the right conversation. But really, at the end of the day, that's where I put a lot of emphasis on the vetting process itself, right? Getting to understand how people work, what kind of communication style they work best with, what kind of coaching style or mentoring style they work best with, where they've had successful conversations, how they manage conflict. Some of these soft skills that are growing increasingly more important today are where we want to be better vetting people. So I still put heavy emphasis on the search and vetting process for that exact reason. We can hear some of the story on paper, but how can we dive a little bit deeper and navigate how they correlate with the culture that we identify and want to hire for? So I'd say it's a mix, but really dependent on the conversation itself and how you vet people.
So then on the other side of the coin, as a candidate, how would they optimize their profile to be the most effective way of
Mm.
highlighting their skill set in a search like you do?
I think today, the importance of optimizing your profile needs to stay in alignment with what is most evident and most matter of fact and truthful, and not necessarily taking a job description of an ideal job using chat gpt to have that mirror and be reflective on your LinkedIn. Now if there's credibility, there's tangible results, achievements, outcomes that have been achieved, that, let's say, Christophe, if I were to ask someone, their previous manager or peers, that they would echo the same thing, then yes, we would want to optimize it in a fashion that truly reflects distinctive value, domain expertise. And in today's market, in more of a niche fashion, right? We need to really hone in on what we can control, let go of the things that we can't. That includes how you represent your brand and optimize your LinkedIn. Now, I think from a more recruiter based perspective, you want to do certain things so that you can stand out on the search. Obviously, there's conversations around adding open to work privately or publicly. Privately would enable people that use LinkedIn Recruiter like me to see that you're open to the conversation in more of a private manner. Publicly is when you actually see people that are a little bit more open and outward with the fact that they are looking for what's next. There are skills and assessments and certain things that you can add onto your LinkedIn profile that will, number one, help you separate yourself. That includes your content activity. If there's projects and summaries that you're able to share, that's a fantastic way to promote that. But then there's also skills and assessment that are actual components of the search toggle that we can use to lead some of the searches. So as long as you're buttoning all these different pieces up in the right fashion, you are optimizing your LinkedIn profile. The coach in me, though, wants to make sure people are staying true to the brand that truly makes them who they are distinctively and is reflective accordingly.
So, hard question for you, and I have this sometimes with the individuals that I coach is how do you define where you want to go?
So something that I like to do with some of my clients that I've coached through career transition is instead of trying to manufacture the right answer or help people find where they want to go, I'll use a process of elimination to bring us to this point in their career. So what I mean by that is have a clean slate, look at maybe the last job, the most recent job, and maybe a couple before that, and really start reverse engineering everything, the good, the bad, the growing lessons that were achieved, the type of interactions, the stakeholder relationships, the achievements, everything in between. And if we could find some commonality there, that could be a very useful tool for us in identifying what's next in a really honest manner. So I do that. And then more or less related to how competitive it is out there today, where is someone most credible? That's bringing in more of a data-driven approach by way of the achievements, the KPIs, the performance metrics that they've continued to exceed time and time again, depending on what field they're in respectfully. And where is that repeatable throughout their career? Use a bit of the process of elimination. Then we could talk about what elements of culture they thrive in. And when you can combine those things, it will help you at least start to chisel out the path towards an ideal next job or ideal next company, which I think is more important now than I've ever seen in our career.
And then how do you take that, them wanting to go to the next step to really show the organization that they can make an investment into this candidate that will deliver results in the future? Because oftentimes, if you bring in someone that's overqualified, they're not going to stay long.
Yeah. So I want to make sure I understand that question. Are you asking about how can you do everything you can to assure that before hiring a candidate, that it's the right decision long term? Just I want to understand that a little bit more clearly.
From a candidate perspective, there's always that desire to grow.
Right.
And when you find that great candidate that can grow into a role, it could be an asset for an organization.
Right.
How do you steer them towards that candidate versus one that might be overqualified, have all the KPIs that you're looking for, but then they potentially risk that person outgrowing the role in a relatively short period of time?
Yeah. I really have become more of a believer in finding motivational alignment. It's a degree of actual negotiation skills, which I know can be a frightening thing to hear for anyone that's interviewing or even for the interviewer as you're getting closer to determining whether you want to invest into this person long term. What I mean by motivational alignment is having an idea of what is needed now that includes the criteria and all the things that we pull from that intake call and how we use that as a rubric to interview people and shortlist them, but also keeping in mind long term, like what is the culture defined as today? A way that you can also do that exercise, I think it's a team building exercise. Ask the people that are working there now. I think oftentimes the culture isn't just the job description that's on paper. It's reflected by the people that are on the team currently, what their story looks like when they started and where they've come since then. I'm pivoting a little bit, but back to your question, I think motivational alignment, having a clear definition as a company and what that looks like and using that to see if there's alignment with the actual candidate's motivations, near term and long term, will help alleviate some of those concerns as to, are we hiring someone that is indeed overqualified, or are we hiring someone that has a similar intention and motivation of a growth track that we are committed to? And I think if you can find that commonality, a lot of that will be alleviated even before you get to the point of extending an offer, and will probably help you actually improve your offer acceptance rates, as long as there's a detailed commitment to that. And also knowing when to say no because of that as a guideline, I would say is something that could be very helpful. Motivational alignment between both parties.
One of the other interesting things I see when the labor market is tight, the economy is rough,
Mhm.
is that some companies pivot to contracting versus hiring. How do you help them differentiate which might be best for them?
Are there certain deliverables, projects, and objectives that are absolutely critical for the company? How is that currently defined by the leadership and the decision makers will help you maybe guide the decision around, okay, is it in our best interest, even from a budgetary perspective, to invest into someone full time? Or could this be a solution by hiring one or two consultants or contractors in the interim to get us to where we need to be? Right. I think components of who you hire, the skill sets needed, the experience needed also will help dictate that answer. If you need someone who's a little bit more well rounded, let's say it's more of a T-shaped engineer by nature who's worked in a startup, for example, that has the ability to wear different hats, that might be an example of the reasoning behind investing into someone full time versus, we need someone with the technical depth or level of knowledge with AI, machine learning, or data science, for example, that has a proven ability based on the project items that we have right now. So I think, again, defining the scope, how it correlates to the problems that need to be solved for the company, and what does that look like from a timeline perspective, will help you have options in who you go to hire in the conversations that you can have. And to be honest with you, I think what I'm seeing in this market on the candidate side is that should be reciprocated. Meaning, I think people keeping an open mind as to, not to try to make it overly robotic here, right? But if you were to productize your distinctive value, what does that look like? And what is the solutions that are solved from that, will help you even distinguish yourself and how you represent yourself in interviews, and how you're having conversations around, here's the goal of what we're trying to accomplish in this season right now. We might even be able to leave that conversation that intended to be around a full-time hiring commitment to both parties realizing that maybe starting on a 6-month contract is actually the better solution. A mixture of all those things. I know I'm rambling, but some of it depends on those answers.
So you mentioned AI and working with these tools. How do candidates even catch up to the technology to be able to help organizations with these types of solutions? And then I have a question on the other end, if organizations are even mature enough to truly be using these solutions, considering the implications.
Help me. Can we go a little more detailed there? Are you referring to how candidates are using AI as a tool once they're hired, or a tool to get hired?
Or a skill set that they can demonstrate that they have competencies around. Because AI fundamentally comes from a data scientist background. Today, most of the language models allow individuals to use natural language to codify their thoughts and create outputs. But if they don't understand the foundational concepts in how AI works, it becomes a vulnerability to the organization. So, one, how do candidates really catch up and truly understand the technology to shine with it? And then, are organizations really even prepared from a data governance, from an organizational structure to really take an AI and throw it in their organization and think all the magic is going to happen?
Yeah. And I'm sure you have way more perspective in the context of security and trust and governance as a whole. And if you're hiring security professionals, that's a whole nother conversation. I think around, yeah, it's an interesting topic because I feel like we're in a market right now where just being more transparent and truthful as to how AI is being used as a co-pilot with respect for our domain expertise and not becoming overly dependent on that as a cognitive offloading tool, if we want to even use that phrase. I think being able to understand how to convey what you can do using AI into your day-to-day workflow and how you can optimize that so that you are indeed more effective with your time is becoming an art and a skill set in itself that we're all experiencing on the fly. I'm not going to pretend that I have the magic solution on how people can confidently with conviction do it, but I think it's just something that we have to be open-minded and conversational with a level of transparency, right? And that even goes for the industry or the leaders of the company or the interviewers and the interviewees, right? This is how we're maybe using AI currently to optimize various engineering tasks, workflows, whatever that might be. And I know that we're talking universally, it sounds like here, Christophe, right? If you're
Yeah.
hiring data scientists, that's probably a different conversation, right?
Yeah.
In terms of the actual language models and code that's being used. I'm speaking more or less from a broad tool set. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's such an interesting thing, right? We're all prompt engineers right now in our own respect. We all use AI. We're all learning how to maximize how AI is being used. It could be for go to market strategy. It could be back end engineering, operational inefficiencies. I was researching the original meaning of what engineer means. I thought it was timely given the era of AI. I don't have it at the top of my mind, but not completely ridding of the critical thinking, the creative thinking, our cognitive ability, but being able to articulate how AI is functioning as a co-pilot to amplify what we can bring to the table. Something in there is something we're all navigating right now, honestly.
I think that's important. And then from the organizational perspective, having that transparency, we need to put controls around it, but we have to think about what is our expected output? How are we trying to use AI? Does this person have, you said cognitive co-pilot, do they have the experience or the ability to cognitively translate what you're trying to do to have an AI help them
Yeah.
versus vibe coding, which is a new term these
Right.
days that engineers just put in a prompt and, oh, let's follow the stream and go along versus having a structured approach to solutioning.
Yeah. And that's vibe coding's an interesting conversation these days too, right? It's if you're going to commit to that in the context of assessing someone, I think the mindset and the intention behind that interview format needs to maybe shift a little bit too, right? It's almost like a working session and getting a feel of what it's going to be like to work together on the spot, which may change a little bit of our own expectations and what we're trying to just consciously assess in that moment with that candidate is fascinating to me. I think I got a question for you around trusting AI in the context of setting up security best practices within a company and maybe where things are at nowadays with that process. And there's a lot of regulatory compliance. I'm assuming AI governance that's taking place everywhere, just security measures as a whole. Like for you, Christoph, where are things at for cybersecurity leaders these days and trusting AI as a valuable tool to maintain security posture? Or is it still a bit of a gray area of a little bit of a song and dance of AI optimizing some of the tasks, but not fully being trusted, the majority of work being done?
I think it's that because for the moment, we're able to automate
Mm,
many of the low level tasks. We can create decision matrix that can go down and assess the situation, maybe replace tasks that a tier one engineer might do repetitively over and over
yeah.
because there's defined constraints around it. But when it comes to larger decision making within the organization and larger security models, I think the industry is still in its infancy in designing governance controls around what data AI should access, who should have access to this data, both
Mm,
on the input and the output side, and then understanding potentially any bias that's in the training data, in the LLM model that they're using, and then being able to cognitively say, okay, it gave me this. That doesn't mean it's the answer. I still have to think and use my own experience to see if this response is correct and not just send out everything that it gets. We've seen examples in courts where lawyers will create a brief and cite case law that is totally made up. There's a news story about that in England. There's one about 6 months ago here in the US. There's a dealership that had a chatbot on their website, and it agreed to legal terms to sell a truck for $1 because they convinced the chatbot into those terms and conditions, and the organization didn't have any constraints around what it's allowing its chatbot to do. I think, like you said earlier, we're all prompt engineers, so we also need to think like a threat actor when we're using AI and find the vulnerabilities and prompt it for the worst case scenarios to see what it's going to give you before you put it out live. We've had situations where individuals have been mislabeled as animals, mislabeled as other things. When you think of the use of AI in policing and identification, it has great potential in the area of medical diagnosis, but you still want to have that human assess it. Like, sure, it might say that it's right, but then where do you go from there? Do you trust it blindly? Do you follow up with another test? So I think we're still navigating the world of, do we fully trust AI as
Yeah.
yet?
But I think it feels to me like an exciting challenge for cybersecurity professionals and leaders, because you correct me if I'm wrong here, right? Because you can still keep the spidey sense, understanding security threat, but now that AI has become a part of this party that we're all in, if we want to call it that, governance and acting as a threat actor, it's a shift, but still a high level of competence that's needed, and probably of intuition and understanding security threats now that AI is in the fold and governing that accordingly. I would have conversation for another day. That applies both micro and macro level right now in the world, but interesting nonetheless in detecting threat, governing.
Yeah. When you think of cloud services, everything's code. So what's AI good at? Big
Yeah.
data problems. So you are able to take a learning model and throw it against huge amounts of code and then go, okay, these were previously identified as vulnerabilities. Take that as a pattern to go find and then exploit it and tell me what you get, whether in theory or in a sandbox. But yeah, it does have the potential to really accelerate both on the good side and the bad side, because threat actors are keeping up and also using AI to optimize their fishing, to optimize their hunting. So we have to be cognizant that both sides are using the resources.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a level of integrity and intention there for sure. That's
Wow.
part of the picture.
This has been such a great conversation, Eric. Thank you so much for joining me today. And yeah, I look forward to potentially another interesting conversation down the line.
Absolutely. I appreciate you. Thanks for having me join, Christophe, and have a good weekend. And we'll definitely be in touch in the future.
Okay.